Ethan had always been the type of person who preferred to keep his head down. In a world that was constantly on the edge of destruction, he knew that survival was all that mattered. The Valeri had invaded Earth years ago, and since then, the planet had been divided into sectors controlled by the alien species. Some humans fought back, but most were just trying to survive. Ethan was no hero. He was just one of the countless mechanics working underground, doing his part for the human resistance. But even in the dark corners of the world, danger lurked, and it found him when he least expected it. He had been sent on a routine mission to sabotage a Valeri supply chain. Nothing special, just another day of planting explosives and making sure the Valeri didn't get the upper hand. The plan was simple enough: get in, do the job, and get out. But as he slipped into the enemy's compound, he had no idea that this mission would change everything. The facility was unlike any he had ever seen. It was a research facility deep within a mountain, shielded from the prying eyes of the human resistance. The walls were made of smooth, metallic surfaces that seemed to pulse with a faint energy. Ethan's heart raced as he navigated the labyrinth of hallways, his boots echoing in the silence. He moved cautiously, knowing that one wrong step could alert the Valeri soldiers patrolling the area. But it wasn't the soldiers that caught him off guard. It was her, Talia. He had heard of her, of course. She was a high-ranking Valeri officer, known for her cold, calculating demeanor. A woman who had no tolerance for weakness and no time for human lives. Ethan had seen her in broadcasts, towering over human prisoners, her voice like ice as she delivered orders. But he never imagined he'd come face to face with her. It happened so quickly. Ethan had just planted the last explosive when he heard footsteps behind him. Before he could react, she was there, silent, almost like a shadow. A hand gripped his arm, twisting it behind his back, and in one smooth motion, he was shoved against the cold wall of the facility. His head hit the metal with a sharp thud, and for a moment everything went black. When his vision cleared, he saw her standing in front of him, her glowing yellow eyes staring into his. She was taller than he expected, her dark, sleek armor reflecting the dim light of the facility. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze that sent a chill down his spine. "You're everything I need, human," she said, her voice low but clear. The words echoed in his ears, and for a moment he couldn't even process them. He had expected to be interrogated, maybe even tortured, but this was different. "What do you want from me?" Ethan managed to say, his voice hoarse. His pulse raced, and despite the fear surging through him, a strange curiosity gripped him. There was something about her, something that made him feel like he was a part of something much bigger than himself. Talia stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "I need your DNA," she said, her voice cool and detached. "The Valeri have been studying human genetics for years. We've found something in your kind that could save my people." Ethan's mind raced. He didn't understand what she was saying, but he knew enough to understand the gravity of the situation. The Valeri were dying. Their species had been ravaged by a genetic disease, one that slowly eroded their ability to reproduce. They needed humans, specifically human genetics, to survive. But what did that have to do with him? He struggled to pull his arm free from her grip, but it was no use. She was far stronger than any human, and yet there was no malice in her touch. It was almost clinical. As if she was just performing a task, like a scientist examining a specimen. "Why me?" he asked, his voice shaky. Talia didn't immediately answer. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made him feel like she was peeling away his very soul. "Because you are different," she said finally. "You are more than just another human. You hold the key to saving my species, the key to our survival." Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could a single human possibly hold the key to saving an entire alien race? It didn't make sense, but the way she spoke, so confident, so sure, made him doubt everything he thought he knew. Before he could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, drawing nearer. Talia glanced toward the sound, then back at Ethan. "We don't have much time," she said. "I need you to come with me." Ethan's heart pounded. He didn't have a choice. His mission had already failed. The Valeri knew he was here now. If he didn't follow her, he'd be dead within minutes. But part of him that he couldn't explain, wanted to trust her. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him. Maybe it was the way she had spoken. Or maybe it was just that deep down he knew he didn't want to die. "All right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll go with you." Without a word, Talia led him deeper into the facility, her movements fluid and precise. They moved quickly, silently through the complex, avoiding patrols and bypassing security systems with ease. Ethan kept his eyes on her, trying to understand her, but every time he thought he had a handle on the situation, something new would happen. A glance, a subtle shift in her posture, a change in the tone of her voice. She was a mystery he couldn't solve. Finally, they reached a heavily guarded door. Talia punched in a code on the keypad, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the room was sterile, filled with strange equipment that Ethan couldn't even begin to comprehend. At the center of the room was a table, and on that table was a strange device, something that looked like a medical scanner but much more advanced. Talia motioned for Ethan to approach the table. "We need to run tests," she said. "I need to see what makes you different." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, but he knew he had no choice. He had to go along with whatever she was planning. If he didn't, he wouldn't make it out alive. Talia placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. "This will help us both," she said quietly. "Trust me." And in that moment, as strange as it seemed, Ethan did. He didn't know what was going to happen next, or why this Valeri woman had chosen him, but he knew one thing for certain. His life was never going to be the same again. Ethan's mind was in turmoil as he followed Talia into the sterile chamber. The walls were lined with machinery that hummed softly, giving the room an eerie, otherworldly feel. His heart raced, but his curiosity pulled him forward. He had no idea what was happening, only that he had been dragged into something far larger than himself. The confusion in his chest grew with every step he took. Talia, her movements smooth and controlled, walked toward a large device in the center of the room. It looked like a table, but it was far more advanced than anything Ethan had ever seen. He had no idea what it was, but he knew it was important. She stopped beside it and turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. For a moment, she said nothing, her gaze lingering on him as if she was studying him, piecing together something that only she understood. "Get on the table," Talia finally said, her voice calm but firm. Ethan hesitated, a knot tightening in his stomach. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He didn't trust her, how could he? But there was something in her tone, something that made him feel like he had no choice. He couldn't go back and he couldn't fight his way out. So, reluctantly, he moved toward the table and climbed on. As soon as he laid down, Talia activated the device. The room seemed to come alive, with lights flashing and soft beeping sounds filling the air. Ethan tensed, unsure of what to expect. He glanced at her, but she was focused on the console in front of her, her fingers moving rapidly over the controls. Her face remained unreadable, her concentration absolute. It was as if she was completely lost in her work. "Relax," she said after a moment, not looking at him. "This will only take a few minutes." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. It was hard to relax in a situation like this, especially with the constant feeling that something was about to happen, something big. He had no idea what she was doing to him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with the mysterious power she saw in him. Suddenly, a sharp hiss filled the air, and the device above him hummed to life. A beam of light shot down, scanning over him. Ethan felt a strange, tingling sensation on his skin, as if something was probing deep within him. He stiffened, his muscles locking in place as the feeling grew more intense. His heart pounded in his chest, and he swallowed hard, trying to keep his cool. This was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Talia watched the screen closely, her eyes narrowing as the scan progressed. Ethan couldn't see the details, but he could feel her attention on him, and he had no doubt that she was looking for something specific. The scan seemed to go on forever, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the device powered down with a soft click, and the room fell into silence once more. Talia stepped back, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, studying the data on the screen. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, waiting for her to speak, but she remained silent. It was clear she was processing something, piecing together the information she had just gathered. "What did you find?" Ethan asked, his voice rough from the tension. She glanced at him, her eyes still glowing softly. "You're not like the others," she said simply. "Your genetics, they're different. The scan showed something I wasn't expecting." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Different how?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He had always known humans were resilient, but this This was something entirely new, something he didn't understand. Talia paused, her fingers hovering over the console. She seemed torn, as if she was trying to decide whether to share more with him. After a long moment, she spoke again, her voice softer now. "You have a unique trait in your DNA," she said, her gaze meeting his. "A resistance, a strength that humans typically lack. It's not just your physical durability. There's something else, something genetic. It might be the key to saving my people." Ethan's mind spun. "What are you talking about? How can my genes save you? You're the aliens. You should have the answers." Talia's expression softened, but there was no humor in it. "You don't understand, human," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "The Valeri are dying. Our species is cursed with a disease that's slowly killing us, preventing us from reproducing. We've been searching for a cure for centuries, and we thought we could find it in the genetics of your kind. But I never expected to find this." Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. The Valeri, the invaders, the aliens who had destroyed so much of Earth, were on the brink of extinction. It didn't make sense. They were ruthless. They had wiped out entire cities of humans, taken resources, and enslaved countless others. And now here she was, telling him that they were dying. "I don't care about your species," he snapped, his voice filled with anger. "You've destroyed everything we built. You've taken our people, killed our families. Why should I care about your extinction?" Talia's eyes flashed with something, frustration, maybe, or regret. She took a step closer, her presence commanding. "I don't expect you to care, human, not yet, but this isn't about us. It's about what you can do. The strength in your DNA, it could be the only chance for us both to survive." Ethan was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. His mind raced, trying to process everything she had said. He wanted to hate her, to push her away, to reject everything she represented. But the truth was more complicated. The Valeri might have been the enemy, but Talia, she wasn't like the rest of them. She was different. He could see it in her eyes, in the way she spoke. She wasn't just a heartless invader. She was desperate. "You want to use me?" he said finally, his voice low and steady. "You want to use my genes to save your species?" She nodded. "Yes, but it's not just about using you, it's about survival. Without your help, both of our species might perish." Ethan stared at her, his mind whirling. He had always believed that humanity was the last hope, that they were the ones who had to survive, no matter the cost. But now, faced with this alien woman, this Valeri officer who was asking for his help, he didn't know what to think. He had never felt more torn in his life. Talia seemed to read the conflict in his eyes. "I know this isn't easy to understand," she said, her voice softening. "But you're the only one who can help. You are the key to something greater than either of us. Your choice, it will decide the future of both our species." For a long moment, Ethan was silent, his mind caught in a storm of confusion. He wanted to hate her, wanted to lash out at the Valeri who had destroyed everything. But there was something about her that made it hard to do so. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't the monster he had imagined. She was just a person fighting for survival. And maybe, just maybe, he could help her. But at what cost? Talia watched him, waiting for a response. Her eyes were filled with a quiet urgency, a sense of hope that had long since been extinguished for most of her kind. Ethan could see it in the way she held herself, in the way she regarded him. She was just as desperate as he was. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but unsure. "All right," he said, "I'll help you, but don't think for a second that I'm doing this for you or your people. I'm doing this because it's the only way to get out of here alive." Talia's expression softened, but she didn't say anything. She simply nodded, as if she had expected that response. Then, without another word, she turned and led him out of the room, back into the depths of the Valeri facility. Ethan didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. His life had just become far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. Ethan's life had changed in ways he couldn't have predicted. What started as a simple mission had turned into something much more complicated. He had been caught in the web of an alien race, the Valeri, who had invaded Earth and caused untold destruction. Yet here he was, helping one of them, Talia, the Valeri officer who had somehow convinced him that her people's survival might depend on him. He didn't know how to feel about that. The weeks that followed their first encounter were a blur of uncertainty and strange encounters. Ethan found himself constantly on the move, being shuffled from one place to another within the heavily fortified Valeri compound. The more time he spent with Talia, the more he realized just how much he didn't understand about the Valeri. They were an advanced species, yes, but they were also fragile in ways that no one had ever expected. Their technology, though far beyond anything Earth had, was not enough to stop their inevitable decline. Talia had explained it to him in more detail over the past few days. She had shown him data, studies on their species, rapid genetic deterioration, and how the Valari had been using humans as test subjects for years. Ethan had never thought much about it. He had been too focused on surviving the war, but hearing her speak about it made him feel something. Was it sympathy, or was it something else? He couldn't tell. One evening, after they had returned to a secluded part of the compound, Talia led him into a small room that looked nothing like the cold, sterile labs they had been in before. This room was warmer, almost homey in comparison. There were comfortable chairs, a small desk, and a single large window that overlooked a quiet courtyard. "You're getting used to the place," Talia remarked as she gestured for him to sit down in one of the chairs. Ethan sat down but didn't say anything. He had learned that talking too much around her wasn't always the best idea. Sometimes she seemed almost human, and other times she reminded him that she was. Talia was complicated, and Ethan couldn't figure her out. She was a soldier, a survivor, just like him, but there was something more to her, something that made him wonder if he had misjudged her all along. "Do you ever miss home?" she asked suddenly, as if she had read his mind. "Your Earth, the people." Ethan was caught off guard. "Of course," he said, his voice rough. "Everyone does. The war, the way things have gone, it's hard not to miss it all." He paused, his mind drifting to his family, his mother, his sister, who he feared were lost to the war. "I used to think that if I survived, I could rebuild something, but now I don't know." Talia was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer. "I understand more than you think. The Valeri were once like you. We had a home, too. But it's gone now, fading away as we slowly die." Ethan looked up at her, his gaze sharp. "Then why should I care about you or your people?" She met his gaze with a steady, almost sorrowful look. "Because you're part of the answer," she said simply, "and you're my only hope. The Valeri are dying, Ethan, but you are our last chance. If you don't help me, we won't survive, and neither will Earth." Ethan had heard her say this before, but now the words hit harder. There was no hiding from the truth anymore. The war was bigger than he could have ever imagined, and the stakes were higher than he could have ever understood. The Valeri's survival depended on him, and yet, despite everything, he couldn't bring himself to feel pity for them. How could he? They had invaded his home, destroyed everything he had known, and taken countless lives. How could he ever stand on their side? "Do you really believe I'm the answer?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. Talia looked at him for a long time before responding. "I do. Your DNA, Ethan. The way your species adapts to everything, to the worst situations, the most extreme environments. It's unlike anything we've seen. It's the key to saving us. And without it, there's no future for any of us." Ethan clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. He didn't want to hear it anymore. He didn't want to be the key to saving anyone. But as he looked at Talia, he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. It wasn't just the weight of her people's impending extinction that burdened her. It was the weight of the choice she had made. She had chosen to put her trust in him, a human. She had chosen to believe that he could help. "Why me?" he asked again, this time with more urgency. "Why not someone else? Someone who hasn't lost everything?" Talia seemed to consider this for a moment. "Because you're different, and because you can survive, that's what matters. The Valeri are losing that ability. We've tried everything, technology, medicine, even experimenting with our own genetics, but nothing works. You represent something we no longer have: hope, adaptability, strength." Ethan stared at her, his mind spinning. He didn't know what to think. He didn't know if he could trust her, but part of him wanted to. He wanted to believe that helping her would make a difference. He had fought for his people for so long. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance to fight for something greater than himself. "How can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady, even though his heart was racing. Talia's eyes softened for the briefest moment. "We need to conduct more tests. We need to unlock the potential within your DNA, but we can't do it alone. The Valeri are divided, and I have enemies who don't want to see this succeed. I need your help to get to the next step, and I need your trust." Ethan swallowed hard. This wasn't just about science anymore. It wasn't just about saving the Valeri. This was about survival, about the possibility of changing everything for both their species. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, but he knew what he had to do. He had to make a choice. "I'll help you," he said, his voice resolute. But we do this on my terms. No more lies, no more games. Talia nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Deal. The days that followed were a blur of activity and tension. Ethan and Talia worked together, moving through the hidden corridors of the Valeri compound as they prepared for the next phase of their plan. But it wasn't just the tests that kept Ethan on edge. It was the constant threat that loomed over them. Talia's enemies were closing in, and there was no telling how long they could stay one step ahead. Ethan knew that helping Talia was dangerous. It could get him killed. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was his only chance. It wasn't just about saving the Valeri anymore. It was about his own survival. The war wasn't over, and no matter what happened, he had to keep fighting for Earth, for humanity. One night, as they worked in the laboratory, Talia looked up from the console, her expression unreadable. We're close, she said quietly. The next test will be the final one. After that, we'll know what we have to do. Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of fear and anticipation. He didn't know what the test would reveal, but he knew one thing for sure. Their future depended on it. The days seemed to stretch endlessly for Ethan as he moved through the Valeri facility. His life had become a strange mixture of tension and uncertainty. He no longer recognized the world he had been thrust into. Once, Earth had been his home, a place where he fought for survival against the alien invaders. But now, it felt as if survival itself had become a delicate balance between trust and betrayal. Talia had become a constant presence in his life. She wasn't like the other Valeri he had encountered, the ones who treated him as nothing more than a tool for their war efforts. She was different. She was driven by something deeper. She was trying to save her people, not just from Earth's resistance, but from the inevitable extinction of her species. And she believed Ethan was the answer. But the question that weighed heavily on Ethan's mind was whether he could trust her. Could he truly help her people after everything the Valeri had done to humanity? Every time he looked into her eyes, he saw the burden of her choices, the guilt she carried. She wasn't a villain. She was a survivor, just like him, but that didn't make him trust her completely. Over the past few days, Ethan had grown more comfortable with the idea that his survival was tied to helping Talia. The tests they had been running on his genetics were showing promising results. But each time they came close to uncovering something new, there was always a risk, a moment when Talia would hesitate, unsure of how much to reveal. There was something more at stake here than just the survival of the Valeri. He could feel it. One evening, after another exhausting round of tests, Talia led him to a quiet room at the edge of the compound. It was simple, almost like a living quarters, but it had a warmth to it. There were no cold metallic walls, no beeping machines. Just the soft glow of a few scattered lights and the hum of distant machinery. Ethan had grown used to the sterile, clinical environment of the labs, but this room felt different. It felt human. You should rest, Talia said, her voice quiet. Tomorrow will be another long day. Ethan nodded, but he didn't feel like resting. The weight of the situation was too heavy, too pressing. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, Talia. Every time I think we're getting somewhere, it feels like we're one step closer to something I'm not ready for. She looked at him, her expression softening. For the first time, she seemed almost vulnerable. I know this is hard for you. It's not easy to understand. But you're doing something no one else could. You're giving us a chance. Ethan stood by the window, staring out into the dimly lit courtyard. His mind was racing. But at what cost? He muttered, more to himself than to her. Talia didn't answer right away. She stepped closer, her footsteps almost silent. You're not just helping us, you're helping yourself too, she said softly. He turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean? There's something you need to understand, Ethan, Talia said, her voice steady. The future of both of our species depends on what we do next. If we succeed, humanity will not just survive, you will thrive. This isn't just about the Valeri, it's about Earth's future. Ethan felt a surge of anger rise within him. I'm not your savior, Talia, he said, his voice harsh. You're asking me to trust you, to believe in something I don't understand. You've taken everything from us. How can I trust you? Talia's eyes darkened, and for a moment the hard, emotionless Valeri officer seemed to resurface. You don't have to trust me, Ethan, she said, her voice cold. But you will have to decide if you want to live, if you want humanity to have a future. Because right now we're all on the edge of extinction. Her words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Ethan didn't speak for a long time. What she said made sense in a way, but it also felt wrong. How could he ever trust the very species that had nearly wiped out his own? How could he ever forget the destruction they had caused, the lives lost, the suffering? But as he stood there, watching Talia, he realized something. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't even asking for his help out of some misplaced sense of loyalty. She was simply asking for a chance to survive, and in the end, that was all any of them had left. A chance. Ethan took a deep breath, his chest tight. He couldn't let his anger cloud his judgment. He had a role to play in this, whether he liked it or not. The Valeri were desperate, and maybe, just maybe, he could use that desperation to make a difference. Not just for them, but for Earth. "All right," he said, his voice low but steady. "I'll help you, but don't think for a second that I'm doing this because I trust you. I'm doing this because I have no other choice." Talia's expression softened, and she nodded. "That's all I can ask for." Over the next few days, Ethan and Talia worked side by side in the lab. The tests they were conducting on his genetics were more intense than before. They were getting closer to something, closer to the solution that could either save or destroy them all. But with each test, with each new piece of information that came to light, the stakes grew higher. One evening, as they pored over the results of the latest experiment, Talia stopped suddenly. Her eyes widened as she scanned the data on the screen. This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, his heart racing. "What is it?" Talia looked at him, her expression filled with awe. "We've found it. The key to unlocking the potential of your DNA. The resistance you have, it's not just physical, it's genetic. It's the missing piece we've been searching for." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "So what now?" "We begin the final phase of the process," Talia said, her voice resolute. "The procedure will be difficult. It will take everything we have, but it's our only chance." Ethan didn't know what that meant, but he understood the gravity of her words. This was it. The moment that would decide the future of both humanity and the Valeri. Whatever happened next would change everything. But even as he prepared for the next step, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had no idea what Talia's true intentions were. He didn't know if he could trust her completely. But one thing was certain, they had come too far to turn back now. The future was uncertain and the risks were high, but it was the only chance they had.